Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us at the Blind Banter podcast. I'm here with my co host, Carlos. Hey, Carlos, how are you doing tonight?
A little bit curious. You're surprising me here, so let's just jump right into it.
Sounds good. So, this episode, Carlos has no idea about it because I wanted to spring something on him. And Mr. Garcia here is a very, very interesting character. He has done a lot so far in his very short 20, almost 21 years of his life. And tonight we're going to do an expose, and I have some questions for him so we can all learn a little bit more about some of his positive things that he's done in his life and some of the triumphs and hurdles he's went through.
Huh. All right.
That sounds pretty enthusiastic.
No, I'm just like, yeah, I guess it's interesting, eh? God, now I see why you didn't bring it up before, because I would have clammed up.
So now a lot of the stuff I found out from him when he tried to give me a little task, which I won't get into, but I learned a lot of stuff about him. And one of the main things I understood from one of the reporters that did an article on him is that he was one of the best wrestlers and grappling contestants slash, I guess, um, wrestlers in Wisconsin. Now, I want to hear a little bit more about this. So, do you want to let us know kind of at the beginning, kind of how you got into it and some of the triumphs and some of the places that you went with it?
Yeah, so it's actually a good story. I joined the wrestling team when I was in high school. I was always, kind of a pudgy kid, didn't really do much sports growing up. And when I got to high school, like every young man, I wanted to play football. But for a lot of reasons, I couldn't do that. And so, I was kind of disappointed. And I was like, well, I'm just guess not going to get into sports because I'm not a big runner. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into like tennis or any of those sports. And then somebody told me, hey, you should get into wrestling. And by chance, my biology teacher was also the coach. And so, he comes to me and he says, hey, I heard you want to get into the wrestling team. And I hadn't really had this interest. They just said, you should join the wrestling team. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And so they went and actually told him. And so they kind of convinced me together, like, hey, you should really think about it. Come to one of the practices. You can always quit. Right. But that's kind of the area of my character that they tapped into. And it's that, like, if you make me do something and I decide to do it, I'm not going to quit. Right. So I said, I'll give it a shot. I showed up to the first practice, really nerve wracking, right? Like I'm the only person there, unfamiliar environment. I'm 14, at this point, I'm a totally different person. You guys would not even recognize me back then. I was so timid, didn't talk to anyone. So I was that kid in the corner. And, and I'm just terrified here. Like, oh my God, I'm going to get, I'm going to be wrestling this dude. And then my size was very similar to our captain, who was jacked. I mean, this dude, football player, ended up playing football in college, like really, really good guy at wrestling, football, all these things. And he was in my weight class and he would just dominate me every day, right? Like just boom, 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 drop me out, drop me, pick me up, drop me again. It was hard, but I knew I wanted to keep going. So I ended up, I didn't do so well that first year, like many first years, but I ended up doing well enough that I wanted to do it on a full-time basis. So I competed a little bit over the summer, went through about 5 or 6 tournaments, would go to summer practices, went to like 2 or 3 camps, got better. But at the same time, I think what got me there was that, I liked wrestling, but that was also when my academic career kicked off. So it was a really interesting balancing act between those two things. Because, what was going to be more important to me? Was it going to be wrestling or was it going to be, going from 0 to 100 academically?
Now, going into the whole wrestling thing, what was some of the trials and tribulations you had to kind of overcome, and how did you make it work for your particular your needs?
Yeah, I think the biggest one was just having to work, once we got into it, my teammates really understood that there was no holding back and there was no, there's nothing to it, right? Like they should just treat me like they treat another wrestler. And they did. It might have taken a little bit, but everyone started treating me normally by the end of it. But I think that was probably it. The biggest one, obviously, that happens in any wrestler's life is just losing, because it's such an individual sport. And especially if you're like me, right? Like if you lose, you can't blame anyone. Like that's That's really it. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I love the sport, is because, if you're a football player and you lose, you can say, well, it was the quarterback's fault, or it was so-and-so's fault, right? You can blame it on somebody. But in wrestling, if they, get you in something and they throw you to your back in front of everyone, and, and they pin you, you can't say, well, it was the coach's fault because no, it's your fault. And so that, I learned that really much the first summer practice, because that's when I had some coaches who were very upfront. One of them was a former Vietnam vet, has been coaching for like 50 years or something like that. Really, really cool guy. And he would take us to all these practices out in, about an hour, 2 hours away into Wisconsin. And I remember one time I was wrestling at this tournament out, and they threw me in with this dude who was like, oh my God, I don't even know, right? Really good guy. He catches me in this hole, just boom, throws me to my back. And I was upset, because I was like, what the hell? We didn't learn that in practice. And he goes, Carlos, you can't say that. And I said, what do you mean I can't say that? You didn't, I was getting all defensive. Like, you guys didn't teach us that in practice. He goes, no, that's not something we can teach. We can't teach you everything in wrestling. You have to be able to go out there and take care of it. And you know what? If you lose, you lost because you couldn't defend it. We've taught you to defend that. I'm like, oh. He's like, yes, we did. You weren't there that day. Remember, whatever day, day X, you weren't there. I was like, just hung my head. Like, oh, shoot. And so that's really the biggest one, right? It's about individual responsibility. And that was really the best lesson I learned from wrestling, I think, is like, so many things in life are more than just you, right? But don't worry about that, because that's not something you can control. Worry about what you can control. And, you will fail, even if you, do your best. That I'm clearly an example of that. I wasn't like a state champion or anything, even though I did try pretty hard. But the fact is, if you can do your best and still hold your head up and know that, you did your best and you keep going with it. If I had really been, that passionate about it and had continued with it, I think I could have been a lot better because of that single example.
Now, what was your greatest achievement while wrestling?
It's not going to be like a title or anything like that. It was just, as simple as this sounds, I think it was actually competing in all these tournaments and like going out, and the reason I say it's my greatest achievement is because it turned me into a different person, right? Like, just being able to go to these summer tournaments where, there's a lot of my high school teammates would go to all the practices, maybe not even all the high school practices, and then just completely drop it off the radar in the summer. But I actually stayed with it for 3 years, just completely dedicated to the sport. And yes, I never made it to the state tournament, and I think that probably would have been my biggest achievement if I, had done really well and become a state champion. But realistically, it was sticking to it, because I can't enumerate how many times I thought, I should just quit this. Why am I still here? Right? No one's going to care if I quit. Like, no one's pressing me. No one sits here and goes, Carlos, if you quit the team, there's going to be bad consequences, right? Because it was hard. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done any wrestling training, but just the training itself is just brutal, right? You run for 45 minutes, then you do some basic drilling, then you might learn a couple new techniques. And in the last 30 minutes, you're just doing live wrestling with all these different people. And then if the coach is particularly brutal that day, if it's like a Tuesday, and you have practice on Saturday, if you have a tournament on Saturday, you might do like one of those things where it's like one guy goes in the middle and then three guys just boom, 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 right? You have to take them all out. And by the fourth or fifth guy, you're done. You're just, and like, that was probably the worst thing for me, was doing that. And then, but I knew I had to stick with it. I was like, I can't quit. That's just not in me. And I didn't end up competing my senior year because I went into academic decathlon, and we can talk about that after this. But that was kind of one of the reasons why I was like, if I do quit, it can't be because I'm just going to go home and sit on my butt. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to quit because there's another opportunity out in the horizon for me. And when academic decathlon came around, that's kind of what motivated me a little bit. But I didn't see that as quitting. I just saw that as turning a page and moving on, and being able to leave the sport with my head high, I think, was really important to me, and that was probably my greatest achievement in the sport.
Perfect. And yeah, you just hit on it, and that was actually my number two question that we're going to start off with tonight. Is, now, you went fairly far with academic decathlon. Do you want to let us know a little bit more about that?
Well, I myself individually did not, but it's a team. It's slightly a team sport, but it's also an individual sport, right? Or sport. I guess you can't call it a sport. It's a competition. But it's a team competition in the sense that, you and your team have to accumulate X number of points and then you guys move on to different competitions. But it's an individual sport in the sense that you have to get medals. And so I ended up, we ended up contributing to we ended up going to the team competition, the national team competition. I had one of the highest scores on the team. My friend Jacob had the highest score by like quite a bit, but regardless, it was a good, it was a good competition. We did really well. I won several awards. I think the biggest thing with decathlon though is how much you have to like put in extra, like how much extra effort you need to put in to get so little, right? Because the difference between, and this is how I mature all the time, right? I think academic decathlon taught me this, that like the difference between, somebody who's good and somebody who's great is that last little bit of effort that you have to put in. And at the time, I didn't really understand that. Like for me, it was like, do I really need to put this effort in? Do I really want to be the best? And I was worried about other things. I'm going to be, I'll be honest. I was worrying about getting a date to the prom and like other things, trying to just do other things that weren't really related to academics. And not to mention I'd gotten into Penn. So I was like, I don't need this. Like what? But that's it, right? Now that I'm older, I like that's kind of where I develop now, right? Like my mentality has completely changed where it's like, I want to be the best, regardless of whether, regardless of whether this is just going to go into the trash and it's not going to matter to anyone, or whether it's going to be, my life. I want to be the best at it. And I think, going up to that, going to that banquet afterwards when they give you the awards and, just not really, getting my scores back and they weren't as great as I had expected and going, oh man, I wish this was supposed to be a good moment for me, but it wasn't because I didn't put in that effort that really, kind of transformed me. But regardless, I think we did okay. And, it was a great competition. Like that's probably the best thing I learned from it.
Okay, perfect. Now, you've been blind since 2, and I'm actually very curious myself. Is kind of tell us a little bit more about your early life, like kind of how going through grade school and just, did you have those supports that you needed to, and if not, how did you overcome it, and kind of how, because I know you've said before, like your parents have always kind of treated you as a quote unquote normal child, where they were always kind of getting you to do your own thing, even though you did have a disability, and kind of just being the best that you can be. Do you want to kind of tell us how, or what you remember of kind of your early life, and kind of what you've learned and how it's made you the guy that you are today?
So, to answer a few of your questions. So I think, yeah, I did have that support, right? Like, especially in school, I had a really, really great network of teachers that kind of stayed with me. We have a TBIs, anyone here in America would teacher of the visually impaired. I'm not sure if you guys have those in Canada, but essentially what they do is they travel around the district that you're in and help you, just meet your classroom goals. So, if you have work, they might put it into Braille for you, or they might get you graphics, whatever it is. And I had a really great network of them. I had 2 of them that were just really into making sure I had all my materials and I wasn't slacking and I wasn't using blindness as like, oh, I can't do this, so I'm not going to do it, right? Like they would come in and say, no, Carlos is not being honest and he's going to do it. And now he's going to do it twice because he said he couldn't do it, right? So that was a really, really good thing. At home, yeah, I think my mother treated me with a little bit more like, oh, what are you going to do with your life? You're blind. And my dad was kind of the opposite, where he's like, well, you're going to do something, like you're not going to sit around my house. So he kind of had more of that mentality of like, hey, you got to do something. But at the same time, my parents have always been really hard workers. We didn't have much money growing up. But the fact that like they were working hard to make sure that we did have more money, and now we're doing, we were not rich by any means, but we're doing better than we were back then when we were, sleeping on floors and stuff. It wasn't a great experience, but at the same time, it really teaches you a lot about the value of hard work, right? Because although it doesn't happen instantly, I think that that's, one of the things that I always look at whenever you're in the dark, deep depths of something where you're like, oh, right, especially right now, right? People might be laid off. People might be saying, it's never going to get better, all this. And when you look at that, from age probably 4 to 8, it didn't look like it would get better, but it does. It always does, especially if you keep putting that effort forth. And I think, when you go and you say, well, my friend put in all this effort and he didn't do that well, maybe he quit halfway there, right? And I think that's kind of where I get it. And don't get me wrong, we're not rich or anything. It's not like we're billionaires, but we're doing well. And I think that kind of taught me a lot about the persistence of hard work and making sure that, you drive forward, even though you might have these limitations. Like in my parents' case, it was that they didn't speak the language. In my case, it might be that I can't see, but it's always important to keep going forward,
And what would be the most memorable, I guess, challenge that you've had as a child? How you were pretty much forced to overcome stuff. Like I know there's so many, I'm sure, but I'm sure there's at least one or two stories that kind of stick into your mind. Maybe when you were extremely young, or when you were not even, maybe more of a teenager.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is always that I've always been a bookish person, and it's only been more recently that I'm like more intense. Like I was always that kid that people would push around, and it was I would sit in the corner reading a book, or talking to myself, right? Like I was always that kid who seemed a little bit off, and then kids didn't like me because I was always that kid who also was like, no, that's not right, it's actually this. And so that obviously didn't help matters. And so a lot of what I can remember is just kids messing with me, like poking me in the face, and moving away as soon as I would try to read for them, right? Things like that.
Oh, jeez.
But it also taught me a lot about being intense and like actually getting up, because I remember one time this guy poked me, and I grabbed his hand and I yanked him, and I said, come back here and poke me again and I'll kill you. And like I guess I said it so intensely that like he actually backed off. And like, so it's funny because at that point no one really respected me or anything like that, but like the big guy, like, and I say the big guy because he was the guy who like everyone listened to, everyone respected. He came up to me and he said, hey man, if you have any problems with him again, you just let me know, right? I won't say his name, but he's like, I'm this guy. And I was like, he's like, just shout out my name, I got you. And I was like, all right. And since then, like, no one would mess with me. And that's kind of, I'm not advocating that you do that thing, but like what I am saying is that you have to stand up for yourself at some point. And that's kind of what I learned from all that bullying, because from like 4th grade to 8th grade, I never did that. And then when I did, all the bullying kind of like chilled out, because people were like, okay, that guy actually stands up for himself. Now, if I wasn't blind, I'm sure that guy would have tried to beat me up. But, like, I was a big kid. I probably could have fought him off, honestly. But yeah, that's kind of one of the things that those kind of challenges really develop you. And I kind of learned to stand up for myself, and that, that follows when you're at work and somebody tries to give you too much work or whatever the case might be. You have to stand up for yourself and make sure that you advocate.
Now, what was your most joyous moment that you had, just where, I'm not necessarily saying about blindness, but just kind of as your younger, earlier life, where I wouldn't necessarily say you felt normal for a day or even like for a time, but you just felt like there was really no cares in the world and everything was great.
I'm kind of a dark soul in the sense that like I can't really remember a specific moment, right? Like, to me, I don't know. I don't store those moments as much as I store the learning moments. Like, that's just not how my brain works, right? And people are like, oh, that must be terrible because you just have these terrible memories. And that's not true. What happens is that those types of great moments come to me when I need them. But for the most part, like right now, I feel tremendous. And that's like, if I that's probably why the reason that I'm not, those memories aren't coming to me now. It's more about like, hey, remember when this happened? Yeah, don't let that happen again. Make sure you push yourself. And vice versa. When I'm feeling a little bit more down, I'll be like, oh man, it's not so good right now. Oh, but I remember when this happened, right? Like, when I graduated from different, 5th grade and 8th grade and stuff like that, and I got all these plaques. Like, I guess one of the ones that I really liked was when I was, what was it? Like, I competed in a speech contest, and I made it to the state competition as a 4th grader. And you know what's funny about that? I put absolutely no effort into it. In fact, I tried to sabotage myself because I didn't like the idea of competing at like this state competition. Like, to me, it just seemed like extra work, right? And I was like, why do I have to do this? Why am I so good that I qualified for a state competition? Like, and that's obviously the antithesis of what I am today, but that's like, it was definitely a joyous moment, despite of how much antipathy I felt for the whole process. I was like, it was so great to have my parents be like, yeah, we're proud of you, you know. And I was like, oh yeah, this is good.
Yeah, that's quite. Now, how did you end up placing on your spelling bee?
It was not a spelling bee, it was a speaking competition.
Or
I
sorry,
think I got
yes,
third place. I think I got third place.
that's not
I
bad
don't
at
remember
all.
specifically. I do have a plaque. Yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't bad.
Excellent. No, I've never gotten into one of those yet. So
Yeah, it's
because
interesting.
I was very much like, yeah, it's extra work. I'm too lazy.
Yeah, no, and I mean I was in fourth grade, right? I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you're at a different mindset at that point.
Now, you currently go to the Wharton School of Business,
Mm.
and do you want to tell us kind of how you were able to get into Penn? And because I know that's a very interesting story, and I know a lot of our listeners would like to hear about that too.
So this is I always like to tell a story because it shocked me when I found out. So like I said, you know, my family's never been wealthy by any means. And when I was a freshman, I had a teacher who said, hey, there's this thing called the PEOPLE program. And PEOPLE stands for Pre-College Enrichment Opportunity Program for Learning Excellence, right? It's like a nice little spiffy moniker. And so she's like, you should join it, because what they do is if you get into the program, you successfully complete the program, and then you get into the University of Wisconsin here, you can get a full scholarship to the University of Wisconsin, right? And for like somebody like me, I was like, wow, that's a huge opportunity. So I joined the program. And that summer, I got into the program, had a good experience. Really owe a lot of that to one of my peer mentors at the time. His name was Jameson, really awesome guy, made the experience tremendous for me. And but when I came back, they had administered the ACT, which is like the big college test for me, and I got like a 20. Right now, just to give you an idea, 21 is the national average, and it's out of 36. So, but 20 is like terrible. Like you're below average. I guess I was a freshman, so I could give myself a break. But regardless, right? But I remember thinking to myself, I know I can score better on this test. What is it going to take? And so I looked up how to get a 36, because I was like, well, if I'm going to try, I'm going to try for the best, right? And then under that article, it was from this blog called Prep Scholar. It's still there. It's great, really good resource for studying for these tests. But it said related articles, and there was one about how to get into Harvard. And I was like, Harvard? Huh, I guess if I do get a 36, I can get into Harvard, right? And then I said, but hold on, how am I going to pay for Harvard? Like, Harvard's like $30,000 a year. That's what I mean, it's more like 50 now, but I'm like, that's not going to work, right? And so I did some research, this was like in fall of 2016, probably. That was 2015 when I was a sophomore in high school. And I remember it was the Thanksgiving week. We had the whole week off, so I just spent that week studying and doing research about this. And I found out that Harvard is actually, all these Ivies offer really good financial aid packages, especially if you're lower income. And even if you're not, like, they really help you out, and they offer a lot of scholarship opportunities in spite of what you might hear. And I said, this is probably my best opportunity. And I really need to get this score. The way I saw it was a matter of like, making it into somewhere where I could actually develop myself and become a better person. And I spent the summer studying. I started a little earlier than most people because I had to get the books in Braille, and that took a couple months. But when I did get them, I spent the summer studying, went to the PEOPLE program again, which was great. And then junior year, I started taking the test. I got like a 33 out of 36, which was really great because, really a lot of hard work was put into that. And I applied to the University of Pennsylvania through this program called QuestBridge, where they offer you like full ride scholarships if you get in and you're like a low income student like myself. And I got into UPenn in December, and it was like so exciting for me because I was like, wow, this is what hard work can get you. You know what I mean? Like, when I remember those days when I would study for the ACT and I'd pick up these, just to give you an idea, it was a book that was 600 pages. So most people would carry it in their backpacks. It was a 15, or I think it was 20 volumes for me. So I had to carry 2 boxes of books around with me whenever I'd travel. Because
needed a wagon.
Yes, no, I did. Like, I would have to carry these massive boxes with me. And my dad goes, what up with all these boxes? I'm like, these are books. He's like, what are these books for? And I was like, well, I'm studying for this test. He's like, wow. He's like, this is crazy because most people don't even carry around their school book, which is like, one freaking book. and you're carrying around a box. And I was like, yeah, you know, you got to get after it. And so it was definitely harder. And, you know, you had to work around some of the things, like a lot of the resources were online and they were like, use this, and it wasn't accessible. But there's always a way, right? And that's kind of what I always tell people, like, you know, they might come up and tell me, hey, you know, this isn't accessible, I'm just not going to do it. No, it's not accessible, so figure out a way to make it accessible. And that's, you know, that's what I did with the ACT, and it really turned out well.
Wow. Now, what were some of the, I guess besides, you know, having to cram and kind of learn, what was some of the most memorable, may it be positive or negative, issues about kind of going from starting this people program to getting into Penn?
You know, I think it was definitely the doubt. You know, like when you're blind, it's definitely like, what am I doing? Like, I am going to try to get into an Ivy League school, like the best school in the world. Like me? No, it's not going to work out, right? Like, how is that possible? And like, you know, and I would be like, something's going to happen. You know, so I'm going to get like a 10 on the ACT and like everything's going to go out the drain. And it didn't happen that way. And I think that's like one of the biggest things is you always get so much doubt. Like people think I'm the most confident person. And for the most part, I am. But there's definitely a lot of doubt from time to time where you're like, especially if it's hard. You know, like when it gets really hard, like I struggled a lot on the science part of the ACT. And I remember I spent like, you know, 2 or 3 weeks just working on this single part, trying to get it, you know, perfect. And it was like, like the first week, I was, my all the questions were bad and I wasn't making it in time. And I was like, dude, this is what it's going to be. You know, just this little thing is what's going to derail everything. And like, you kind of have to take a step back at that point. I think whenever you have that kind of doubt and you have to go, all right, I'm just going to take a step back, go to the gym, you know, do something else. And you come back to it and you go, oh, wow, this is actually not that bad. Because often what gets you isn't the fact that your inabilities are there. It's that you're trying so hard, you're putting so much pressure on yourself that you're actually, you know, kind of forcing yourself to make those mistakes. And yeah, that's kind of how I dealt with it. It was just like, whenever you have that type of doubt where it's like, man, is it going to be this one thing that's going to make me work at McDonald's for the rest of my life, even though they wouldn't hire me at McDonald's? But you get what I'm saying. I was like, that's going to be it. And, you know, I think that's probably my most important lesson is just take a step back at that point and go, wow, you know, come back to it. And it really makes a difference. And that goes for anything, right? Whether you're taking a test and you're struggling with a problem or you're, you know, having a problem in your life, just take a step back, leave it alone, you know, for as long as you feel like you need to, and then come back to it. And you'll find out like, wow, this is way better than I expected.
Yeah, no, that's definitely some good advice, because a lot of people get so caught up in the moment and they just can't step back when, you know, the answer you're looking for will literally be right in front of you, but you're just so overwhelmed with everything. It's the little things that you miss. And that can
100%.
usually sometimes be the biggest one. Now,
yeah.
I don't know if they've changed or not from you getting into Penn compared to graduating high school, but what were are the goals in your life still the same as they always have been? And if so, what are they? And if not, how have they changed?
So my goals are broadly the same, but they are a little bit, I think they're the same, right? In the sense that I want to go to Wall Street. I want to, you know, be the man in that segment. But the broad aspect of what I want to do is be the best, right? Like that's kind of what's always driven me. Not just be the best, but be the best representation of blind people and people with disabilities in general overall, because like we talked about in the last episode, you know, you represent blind people wherever you go. And to me, that's kind of like my biggest thing is like, well, if I do well here, you know, the next blind person that this person interacts with is going to be treated well, right? Because they don't have these low expectations of us anymore. They know that I'm capable of it. So they're not going to have this, you know, this next blind guy who comes in or girl come in and say, hey, you know, I need this. They're not going to treat them like they're, you know, unable of doing it. And so that's kind of my biggest thing, right? Is paving that path, but also like just doing well with whatever I do. And I don't know, it's definitely, one of my goals is definitely to do something, you know, on Wall Street and be successful there, maybe start a company or whatever. But at the same time, I want to do something else, like something big, you know, like climb a mountain, or like, I don't know, something that makes it a little bit, makes my life more interesting. Because I don't want to be that guy, you know, who grows up just in a basic existence and, you know, just lives a life and then dies at 95. You know, with 2.5 kids and a dog and a wife.
95 is pretty good these days.
Well, yeah, no, but like, you get what I'm saying. I don't want to be that guy who has 2.5 kids and lives behind a picket fence. And like, I've always wanted to be that person who defies expectations, who people go, oh, he's not going to do that. How can he do that?
Sorry, I just have to ask, what half? What half exactly?
What do you mean, what half?
Well, you said 2.5 kids. So I'm just curious to know what kind of half.
It's just the average. It's just
Yeah,
the average. That's why I say 2.5. Yeah, like I just don't want to be that person. And like, you know, I read this book and I think it's called Identity, but it talks about a lot of what composes people's identities. And one of the things they talked about is thymus, right? Like it's that warrior spirit where there's people who want to be more than everyone else, right? It's just in the blood for them to be able to go out and say, hey, I want to do this or I want to do that. And like, and they've always you know, some of them are warriors, some of them do, you know, today they do crazy things like I was just telling you earlier about free solo, right? Like that's with Alex Honnold climbing that mountain, like, or that rock face, like that's the kind of warrior spirit, you know? I don't have that type of warrior spirit. That's some intense stuff. Just for context, everyone, he climbed El Capitan, which is like the hardest rock face in Yosemite, with no ropes, just free. So if he missed a hold or if he slipped, it was over. And that you know, when I saw the movie and he's like, I'm doing it because I have a warrior spirit, you know, you conquer your fear. And I don't have
but
that.
He did have
spirit.
sight though. Yeah, he did have sight.
Oh, of course. No, I'm never going to do something like that. But yeah, I don't have that warrior spirit. That's another level of warrior spirit. But I do have a spirit where I'm like, I don't just want to sit around and do nothing. Like, you know, I told you last week, like I had nothing to do before I started classes, and that was the worst time for me because I was like, I'm not doing anything. I feel like I'm wasting away. And you know, that's why I want to do something like, you know, on Wall Street, but also do something like climb a mountain, or maybe climb El Capitan with ropes. Not without ropes.
A little safer that way.
Right. Preferably like 3 ropes too, you know.
For sure. Now, who would you say some of your idols or some of the people that you look up to the most? And have they changed over the years? And if so, how have they changed, or what has changed in regards to what you see as an idol or someone that you want to look up to?
Yeah, I think, you know, we're speaking about climbing. Eric Weinmeier, he's a blind climber, climbed Everest in 2001, first blind person to do so. I met him in person. Definitely the kind of person I want to, you know, it's the kind of man I want to be, right? Somebody who takes the fear, because it's, you know, imagine being up there. Like he would talk about how there was one point where he just had to jump and trust that his pole would land on the other side of this crevasse and not like fall in, right? Like that's outrageous. That's scary to me. And to conquer that fear and to be, you know, the first blind person to do it, that's awesome. And then in the business world, probably more so like, you know, I've always admired Warren Buffett, like just building it up. You know, he's not a pretentious guy. He just takes care of business. You never hear his name in the gossip columns or anything like that, but he's, you know, one of the wealthiest and most influential investors in the world and in history, really. And I've always looked up to him ever since I was a young kid. But more recently, I've also looked up to people who do things that, like, you know, are risky. Like, you know, Kirk Kerkorian, if you guys know who that is, he built Las Vegas, essentially built a bunch of these massive hotels, and he started with nothing. You know, like his parents were immigrants, just like my parents, and you know, they didn't speak the language, and he didn't speak the language, and he had to learn it just like I did in school. And then, you know, he was a pilot in World War II and would do all these daring things, and then he started his own business. Just a real true story of heroes, right? And those are my type of heroes, because, you know, I'm in the same position where it's like, oh, you know, like it all looks like I'm just going to be here. You know, I started with nothing, but you know, hopefully you can make it into something. Now, I probably won't be a billionaire like he was, but at least make it to some point, you know, some other point in the world. And that's kind of all you can hope for. So I would say my heroes are those types of people, you know, people who take big risks and do big things to change. Like he changed the face of aviation. He changed the face of Las Vegas and the casino business and the movie industry. He owned MGM, you know, they made all these great movies. So that's kind of like, that's the kind of person I idolize, I think.
Okay. Awesome. Now, some of the other stuff. What is the most extreme thing you've ever done in your life?
Ooh, the most extreme. You know, this isn't going to seem too extreme to people, but I think it would be going off to college in Philadelphia, in a city I've never been to. Keep in mind, I'd never traveled before I went to college with a new guide dog and all by myself. Just no type of orientation, nothing like that. And just, like, oh, do you need help getting to class? No, I'll get there. I'll get there somehow. You know, I would say that was probably the most extreme because I was afraid pretty much every time I'd go on campus and walk around and, try to cross the street by myself, these streets with these drivers doing like 90 when they should be doing 30. That was all scary to me. And it was like, and not to mention, I'm nowhere close to anyone that I know. I didn't know anyone coming in. I've never been the kind of guy who quickly makes friends and everyone like, oh, hey, Carla. No, I've never been that guy. I've always been that guy who takes time. So that was the scariest thing for me because it was every day. Whenever Fenway needed to use the bathroom, I'm like, oh, geez, it's going to be another 30 minutes of like trying to find a trash can and then trying to get back inside. Like, this is a nightmare. But, you have to conquer that fear because now I'm a seasoned traveler. Like I've traveled, obviously went to Canada by myself to see you. I've traveled other places by myself, on trains, on buses, on planes, whatever it might be. And I'm not scared of traveling. I'm not scared of, being out in public anymore. I know how to handle myself. And that was a trial by tribulation, but I think that's the best way to learn is just to jump right into it.
So would you say that that was more extreme though than say when you went skydiving? Because I know you said that that was fairly extreme though too.
Yes, that was more extreme. It seems more extreme, but I think it's more extreme because you had to conquer so many more fears than just one, right? Like it was the fear of traveling. It was the fear that I was going to jump, somehow go into the street. It was the fear of like going away from everyone I knew. It was the fear that I wasn't going to make it in college. Like all these different things coming together. I think that's why it was so extreme. But I was skydiving. Really, it was only conquering the fear enough to have your feet out the door because at that point they were going to push you out whether you liked it or not. So that was really, it was extreme, but it wasn't I didn't need to take care of as many things, I think.
Right, fair enough. All right, so we're almost out of time. So I have one last question that I think would be perfect to ask before we wrap up. What is your most enjoyable guilty pleasure?
Ooh, guilty pleasure, eh? I don't know. Probably like just let's see. I'd say it's scotch. I love scotch for some reason. And that's kind of like one of the biggest things I've been doing from time to time now, especially with the pandemic, I'll be honest. Just getting into different ones and like trying out different things because, a lot of people, I got into it originally because my friend was like, dude, you're blind, so all your senses are heightened. You should see if you can taste different notes in the scotch. I'm like, dude, my palate is terrible. Like, first of all, that's a lie. Like, not all your senses are heightened. And second of all, my palate is like the worst thing ever. Like, you give me hard bread or soft bread, it tastes all the same to me, right? And he's like, oh, dude, you should try it. And at first it was like really strong and I didn't like it. But yeah, I think that's probably my guilty pleasure because it's like, I'm not a huge drinker. I try not to get like drunk and go to class, all the stuff other college students do, but definitely enjoy it. Nice glass of scotch here and there. So yeah, that's it.
And are you able to tell the notes and differentiate all the ones that are, put in 15-year-old barrels compared to 10-year-old barrels and vice versa?
Sometimes, but to be honest with you, I think if you handed me two glasses and you were like, which one's the $900 scotch and which one's the $9 scotch, I don't know. I don't know if I'd be able to tell the difference just because I've only been drinking really, for the last even a year maybe. So probably once I get more into it. But right now, that's why I always try to tell people whenever they're getting into something, don't go for the high end right away because oftentimes the high end really offers marginal improvements that you're not even going to benefit from because you don't know anything about it. So, and that goes for everything, right? Whether it's like, a gym or I don't know, anything, the food. Most of the times the high end really offers marginal improvements. And if you're not into it, you're not going to know the difference. So.
Good to know. Now, as we're wrapping up, if you had to tell anybody one thing about you, or kind of how to get over the trial and tribulations that they may, I guess, come face to face with or encounter, what would you tell them?
I'd probably say just never give up. I mean, it seems so like, oh, cliche, but that's it. Like that's all it takes is just have faith. Like when you look at some of the most successful people in the world, you realize that a lot of them had so many tribulations. Like I love the story about how the current CEO of Goldman Sachs got rejected for the job twice for just to be an analyst. Like he applied in the summer of his junior year, got rejected. He applied afterwards as a senior, got rejected, and now he's the CEO. You know what I mean? And what does that take? I think that takes that faith that you're going to be something somehow, or you're gonna achieve that goal somehow. And sometimes it's just a matter of like having that faith and that drive, so that you can actually seize on the opportunities that are presented in front of you at a future date. And that's just what I would say whenever you're having trials. Like, oh, maybe I lost this, or I didn't get this promotion, or I didn't do so well in this class. Just keep going, because you never know how that experience fits into the broader narrative. But if you still have that drive, you'll find out. You'll find a way to get there. That's what I can say. And yeah, I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much. It was definitely an eye-opener.
Definitely an interesting. Yeah.
It definitely was. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know about, and I've spoken to you for many, many hours total, and I didn't even know some of this stuff. So it was definitely great. Thank you for opening up to us.
Well, thank you for doing it. I definitely interesting little thing.
This is all the time we have. So if you guys have any questions or comments about this, please give us an email at blindbanter@gmail.com. You can also find us on the Twitters, on the Facebooks, so on and so forth. Now, we will be tweeting and also adding it on Reddit as well under the blind community about the voting for viewers' choice. So please definitely look into our social medias, or if you're part of the blind subreddit, then I will definitely be posting it in there, as well as the disability Reddit, to try to help. But your support is greatly appreciated. So thank you again, everybody. And until next time, stay safe.
Thank you, guys.